In the freezing mountains of Wyoming, a broken Navy SEAL thought he had lost his purpose, until a wounded military dog appeared at his door, and a terrified child cried out from the storm. What Ethan Cole uncovered next, a forgotten family secret, a fallen hero's legacy, and a miracle hidden in the pines, would change not only his life, but the lives of everyone who crossed his path. This is a story about healing, destiny, and the moments God sends to guide us home. If you believe small miracles can lead to the biggest transformations, hit subscribe, drop a comment, and join us for more powerful stories of courage and hope. Snow drifted across the Wyoming ridge, cold winds carving the world into silence. Ethan Cole had grown used to that silence, even embraced it, because it reminded him of the spaces inside himself he could no longer fill. The cabin he lived in stood alone among towering pines, its wooden timbers worn by seasons of brutal frost and unrelenting storms. Ethan, 34, moved through the world with the disciplined precision of a man shaped by the military. Standing 6'2", with a heavily muscled frame forged through years of SEAL training, he carried the distinctive posture of someone who lived by habits that once kept him alive. His jaw was sharply cut, the kind only men with permanent tension seemed to maintain, and a faint scar curved beneath his right cheek, an old injury from a breaching mission that had gone wrong. His hair was dark brown, buzzed short in a way that still obeyed military standards even though he was no longer active. His skin carried a tanned undertone, hardened by foreign suns and winters harsher than this one. But it was his eyes, steel blue, clear yet clouded, that revealed the truth. They were the eyes of a man who had witnessed death, delivered it, survived it, and come home with more ghosts than memories. Leaving the Navy hadn't been a celebration. It had been the last step of a man whose nerves had frayed to breaking after one mission too many. The explosion that killed 2 of his teammates had also left something shattered inside him. Doctors called it operational trauma. Ethan simply called it quiet, the kind of quiet that clung to him like frost. On this night, winter arrived with full force. Wind howled against the logs of the cabin, slipping through cracks and shaking the shutters. Snow hammered the windows so heavily that at times the world outside looked erased. Ethan sat near the small iron stove, sharpening a field knife he no longer needed, but still maintained out of habit. The rhythmic rasp of steel on stone kept his mind occupied. Busy hands left less room for old memories to resurface. Then came the sound, a faint tap, so small, so out of place amid the raging storm, that Ethan froze, blade hovering mid-stroke. He tilted his head slightly, the instincts trained into him flaring awake. Another tap came seconds later, softer this time, almost apologetic, like a plea rather than a threat. Ethan set the knife down quickly but quietly. His spine straightened, his breath slowed. A soldier's calm settled over him. Everyone else in this region had evacuated days ago due to the incoming snowfront. No one should be on this mountain. No one except him. He moved toward the window with the same care he used when approaching an unsecured structure overseas. His steps silent, his shoulders squared. The storm blurred most of the outside world, but at the far corner of the frosted glass, he saw a dark shape shift. At first he thought it was debris carried by the wind. Then came a whimper, soft, strained, desperate. Ethan's chest clenched before he touched the latch. When he finally pulled the door open, a rush of icy air slammed into him, stinging his face. But what struck him harder was the sight at his doorstep. A dog, no, not just any dog, stood trembling on the porch, a large, powerful German shepherd with a sleek coat of black and silver. Though now soaked and weighed down by snow, its body shivering violently from exposure, its eyes, golden and fiercely alert even in its weakened state, locked onto Ethan with a mixture of instinct, training, and sheer willpower to survive. Ethan recognized that look instantly. A military K9. A SEAL dog, the kind trained to navigate chaos, detect threats, and perform missions some humans couldn't. The kind that didn't whimper unless it had fought past its limit. Ethan knelt slowly, extending a steady hand, letting the dog catch his scent. His voice dropped into a low, gentle register he hadn't used in years. "Easy there. Hey, boy." The dog stepped forward, collapsing partially into Ethan's arms. He caught the weight instinctively, surprised by the strength still coiled beneath its trembling frame. Around its collar, half buried under clumped ice, he saw a metal tag engraved with the name Falcon. Ethan felt something in his chest shift, something painful, something old. Falcon. He had heard that name once, years ago, spoken among SEAL handlers with quiet reverence. A prodigy of the K-9 program. A dog rumored to perform with an uncanny precision, as though he anticipated danger seconds before it appeared. But Falcon was supposed to have been injured in an explosion overseas, the same operation Ethan had barely survived. Official reports had claimed the dog perished, yet here he was, alive, wounded, and somehow standing on Ethan's doorstep in the middle of a Wyoming blizzard. Ethan lifted Falcon inside, closing the door behind them before winter swallowed the cabin whole. He placed the dog near the stove, rubbing his fur to stimulate warmth. Falcon's breathing steadied little by little. Ethan carefully examined him, his hands firm but gentle. A burn mark along the dog's side suggested a blast injury, healed mostly but still tender. Embedded fragments of metal glinted beneath patches of singed fur. Ethan's jaw tightened. This dog had been through hell. Falcon's golden eyes followed Ethan's movements. There was intelligence in them, a sharp awareness that only a highly trained combat dog possessed. Yet there was something else too. Trust. And that struck Ethan deeper than he expected, because he didn't trust much anymore, certainly not himself. "How did you find me?" Ethan muttered, more to himself than to Falcon. The dog blinked slowly. Outside, the storm raged harder, slamming against the cabin walls like a memory Ethan couldn't outrun. Inside, something unfamiliar began to stir. Responsibility. Connection. A pull he hadn't felt since his last mission, when he still believed he could protect the people around him. Falcon let out a soft exhale, the sound small but determined. Ethan sat beside him, leaning his back against the wall. He felt the exhaustion of years settle into his bones, the weight of survival. He wasn't sure when he lost the part of himself that believed in purpose, but somewhere between the desert missions and the explosions and the funerals, it had slipped away like breath in winter air. He studied Falcon again. The dog was young, maybe 2 years old, muscular beneath the injuries, built for speed and power. His ears twitched at every gust of wind, showing sharp instincts that hadn't dulled. He carried himself with discipline, even while exhausted, lying in a position that kept his head angled toward the door as though guarding the space. Ethan recognized the behavior immediately. Falcon wasn't just seeking warmth. He was choosing a post. Choosing Ethan. Why? Did Falcon know him? Was it coincidence or something deeper, something instinctual? Like the dog had tracked the only person whose past mirrored his own? Ethan felt the question echo inside him. He tried to shake it off, but the truth nudged at him. Maybe Falcon had nowhere else left to go. Maybe neither of them did. A surge of protectiveness rose in Ethan, surprising in its intensity. "You're safe now," he said quietly. The words felt foreign on his tongue. Falcon's ears flicked, his body relaxed, and for a moment, the storm outside no longer sounded like destruction. It sounded like a curtain falling on an old life, giving way to something unknown. Ethan didn't believe in fate. He barely believed in tomorrow. But as Falcon rested his head on Ethan's boot, a fragile warmth threaded into the cold edges of his heart. Maybe this wasn't an accident. Maybe the world had knocked on his window, not to haunt him, but to return something he had forgotten, the part of himself that still knew how to save, how to care, how to live. Falcon closed his eyes, trusting the man beside him completely. Ethan inhaled deeply, the scent of pine smoke and thawing snow filling his lungs. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone, and somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispered that this winter night was only the beginning. The storm outside raged on, but inside the small wooden cabin, a soldier and a warrior dog found each other, two broken lives crossing paths at the exact moment they needed to be found. And though Ethan didn't know it yet, this simple act of opening a door would become the first step toward reshaping everything he thought he had lost. Morning light thickened slowly over the Wyoming ridge, pale gold fighting its way through the fog that clung to the trees like ghostly breath. Inside the cabin, warmth from the iron stove drifted gently across the wooden floor. Falcon lay curled near the flame, his black and silver coat glistening with renewed life. No longer the trembling figure Ethan had dragged in from the storm the night before. Though the dog's muscles still tensed occasionally, a reflex born of too many battlefields, his breathing was steady. The scars along his ribs had become faint shadows in the soft light. Ethan watched Falcon for a long moment before stepping into his boots. He wasn't used to sharing the space with another living creature. The quiet had been his only companion for months, but this morning, for reasons he couldn't yet name, the silence felt different, not as heavy, not as hollow. Falcon rose the moment Ethan opened the door. The cold slapped at their faces, but Falcon didn't flinch. Instead, he trotted ahead with the purposeful gait of a trained operative, nose lifted, ears pricked. Ethan followed, pulling his coat tight around his broad shoulders. He had spent most of his adult life reading terrain: sand, mud, concrete, jungle, snow. All landscapes spoke to him in the same language of instinct. But this morning, there was a shift in the air he couldn't place. Falcon froze first, his head tilted, nostrils flaring. Then he moved, sudden and sharp, toward the edge of the clearing. Ethan's senses sharpened instantly. "What is it?" he murmured, though he already trusted Falcon's instincts more than sight. Falcon began circling a patch of snow near the tree line. Ethan walked closer, his boots crunching softly, and then he saw it, a footprint, small, barely the length of his palm, too small for an adult, too deep for an animal. Ethan crouched, jaw tightening. The edges were fresh, snow pushed inward, not yet softened by wind. A child's footprint. One print became two. Then a trail, fading into the thick fog of the forest. Falcon lowered his head, letting out a low growl. Not aggression, warning, recognition. Ethan's pulse steadied into the rhythm he'd lived by for years. Obstacle, approach, assess. His mind flashed through possibilities, none good. No child had reason to wander this far up the ridge. No family lived within miles except one woman, Mrs. Nora Bennett. Ethan rose, scanning the woods. For a moment, he considered turning back. This wasn't his mission anymore. He wasn't a SEAL. He wasn't responsible. But Falcon nudged his hand, eyes fixed on the trail with laser focus. And something inside Ethan shifted. A thread of instinct tugged him forward. The same instinct that once pulled him through collapsing buildings, burning outposts, gunfire ripping across the dark. "All right," he whispered. "Lead the way." Falcon bounded ahead, agile and silent. Ethan followed, breath fogging in the cold as they slipped, between towering pines. The deeper they went, the thicker the mist coiled, draping the forest in an eerie calm that muffled even the sound of their own steps. Falcon stopped again, paw raised. On a low branch of a young pine tree hung a small scarf, red, patterned with faded white stitching. It fluttered weakly in the cold breeze. Ethan reached up, touching the fabric. It was thin, the kind worn by a child. The edges were frayed, tangled in needles as if it had been ripped away in haste. Or fear. "Someone lost this," Ethan murmured, "or someone ran." Falcon's ears flattened backward, his muscles tightening beneath his coat. Ethan recognized that response, not just alertness, but unease. The dog's golden eyes locked onto the forest ahead, searching shadows that held their breath. Something had happened here, something Falcon sensed, but Ethan didn't yet understand. They searched a wider radius, Ethan marking prints, Falcon weaving between trees with the precision of a tactical search dog. But the trail vanished, swallowed by drifting snow and shifting wind. After an hour, they turned back toward the cabin, the scarf tucked inside Ethan's coat. Falcon walked closer to him now, no longer scouting ahead. The silence between them grew heavier with questions. When the cabin came into view, smoke curling from its chimney, Ethan saw movement down the trail. A figure trudged slowly toward him, wrapped in a heavy brown coat and a knitted blue scarf. It was Mrs. Nora Bennett, his closest neighbor, though she lived nearly half a mile away. She raised a hand in greeting. Up close, her age became clear. 72 years old, short and slender, with silver white hair tucked neatly beneath her wool hat. The deep lines on her face spoke of a life spent enduring winters harsher than this one. Her skin was pale, weather-touched, and her brown eyes held a warmth that reminded Ethan of the rare kindness he had known growing up. Nora Bennett was sharp, the sort of woman whose voice carried authority softened by compassion. She'd been a schoolteacher once, before retiring into solitude much like Ethan. But she carried the mountain's history in her words, the kind of memory people couldn't find in books. "Morning, Ethan," she called, breath misting. "Didn't expect to see you up so early." Ethan glanced at Falcon. Found something strange. Nora followed his gaze to the dog, and her eyes softened. "He looks better today. Strong." "He's recovering fast," Ethan replied. "But this morning, he picked up a trail." Nora's brow creased. "Trail?" Ethan drew out the small red scarf. Nora gasped softly, pressing her hand to her mouth. "Oh dear!" Ethan's stomach tightened. "You recognize it?" Nora hesitated, her expression clouding with a mixture of fear and memory. "Not the scarf, but the story it reminds me of." She took a slow breath, steadying her voice. "Ethan, something happened on this ridge years ago, long before you moved out here." Falcon nudged closer to Nora, sniffing at her coat, as though sensing her shift in mood. Nora rested a gentle hand on the dog's head. "There was a boy," she began. "Small, maybe 6. His name was Aiden, a sweet child with dark hair and a quiet way about him. He lived down the road with his father, a Navy man like you." Ethan stood still, feeling the cold wind bite deeper. Nora continued, her gaze drifting toward the pines. "One winter, a storm rolled in fast, much like last night. The boy and his father were out gathering firewood. Only the boy came back." Ethan's jaw clenched. "What happened to the father?" Nora shook her head slowly. "They never found him. Search teams tried, neighbors tried. The snow swallowed the tracks by morning. The boy, he kept saying something was calling them from the woods, something he tried to describe but couldn't." Ethan's chest tightened. "And the boy? What happened to him?" Nora lowered her voice. "He disappeared a week later, left footprints in the snow leading into the forest. No one ever found him." Falcon whined softly as though mourning something only he felt. Ethan stared at the scarf, fingers tightening around it. Footprints. A missing child. A father who never returned. A Navy man like him. The mountain felt suddenly heavier, its silence stretching wide with secrets. Nora lifted her eyes to Ethan, worry etched deep. "Ethan, I don't know what you found this morning, but be careful. The woods remember things we forget." Ethan looked toward the forest, the shadows curling like old scars across the white landscape. Falcon sat at his side, golden eyes fixed on the same distant point, as though he heard an echo of something only he could understand. Ethan swallowed. "Whatever's out there," he murmured, "we'll find it." Falcon's ears twitched, and for a moment the wind carried a sound faint and fleeting, almost like a small laugh drifting through the trees. Ethan stiffened, Nora shivered, and somewhere deep within the forest, something waited. Snow sifted through the Wyoming forest in slow, drifting sheets, each flake catching the pale morning light, as if reluctant to touch the frozen earth below. Ethan Cole moved through the woods with the practiced precision of a man who had spent half his life in hostile terrain, his breathing steady, his footsteps silent, and his senses sharpened to a point. Falcon walked beside him, slightly ahead, but always within arm's reach, his black and silver coat blending seamlessly with the shadows beneath the pines. The dog's golden eyes flicked constantly between the ground and the horizon, tracking scents and disturbances Ethan could not perceive. The scarf tucked inside Ethan's jacket pocket felt heavier with every step. A child missing. A father who vanished decades ago. A trail that had appeared during a storm and then disappeared just as mysteriously. The mountain seemed to whisper questions he was not yet prepared to answer. Falcon halted suddenly. His tail stiffened, his muscles coiling with an energy Ethan recognized instantly. Alert, focused, controlled. Ethan knelt beside him, scanning the ground. More prints. Faint, almost erased by wind, but unmistakable. A sequence of small, narrow steps leading deeper into the forest. "There," Ethan murmured. Falcon dipped his head once. Agreement. They followed the trail through a narrow pass where the pines grew denser, their trunks rising like pillars of an ancient cathedral. Mist threaded between them, silver and cold, whispering across Ethan's cheeks. As they continued, the forest shifted. Birds grew silent. The wind softened. Even the crunch of snow beneath their feet seemed muted, as if the woods were holding their breath. Falcon's pace slowed, his ears angled forward. Then Ethan saw it. A cabin, so well hidden beneath layers of pine branches, snow, and time, that it looked almost fused into the forest itself. The structure leaned slightly to one side, its log walls darkened by decades of storms. Moss crawled up its stones. The windows were clouded by frost and filth. A place long abandoned, long forgotten. Ethan approached cautiously, scanning the perimeter. No fresh tracks, no signs of intruders. Only stillness. When his hand brushed the wooden railing of the porch, flakes of dried bark fell away like brittle memories. Falcon sniffed at the door, his nose twitching rapidly before he let out a sharp, urgent bark. Ethan lifted the latch. The hinges groaned in protest, echoing into the dim interior. The smell hit him first. Dust, old timber, and something faintly metallic, like forgotten tools left to age. Inside, the light filtered through cracks in the walls. Dust drifted lazily through the air, turning the cabin into a canvas of ghostly motes. The room itself was small, single-chambered, with a stone fireplace on one side and a narrow cot on the other. Long, cold embers sat gray in the hearth. A wooden table stood crookedly in the center, its surface warped from years of neglect. But it was the walls that made Ethan's breath falter. Dozens of photographs, black and white, sepia, and faded color, were pinned or nailed across the logs. Men in uniforms, Navy men, dog handlers, entire platoons frozen in time. Ethan stepped closer, the floorboards creaking under his weight. His eyes scanned each photograph, absorbing the faces. Young men with lean frames and steely gazes. Older men with weathered expressions. Seals in desert terrain. Divers emerging from churning oceans. Handlers kneeling beside German shepherds trained for war. Falcon padded beside him, sniffing gently at the wall. Then Ethan saw him. His breath caught. The photograph showed a man standing tall in navy fatigues, broad-shouldered, with a square jaw dusted lightly with stubble. His hair, dark brown, thick, and swept back neatly, looked painfully familiar. His expression was firm but warm, the expression of a man who carried responsibility like a second skin. His eyes, sharp and deeply set, mirrored Ethan's more than any stranger ever had. Beneath the photograph, written in crisp block letters, Captain Samuel Cole. 1979. Ethan felt the room tilt slightly. He reached out, fingertips brushing the edges of the frame. The resemblance was undeniable. The same jawline, the same brow ridge, the same quiet determination etched into the corners of the eyes. Dad never talked about his father, Ethan whispered, his throat tightening. He had grown up with fragments, half-truths, absent memories, a silence whenever he asked. His father, Michael Cole, had died young from an accident Ethan barely remembered. There were no photographs, no stories, no explanations, just a void. And yet here, in a forgotten cabin buried by time, hung the face of a man who looked like him in another life. Falcon barked suddenly, sharp and focused. Ethan snapped out of his trance. The dog stood over a loose floorboard, scratching at the edges with growing urgency. "Easy, boy," Ethan murmured, kneeling beside him. He slipped his fingers beneath the board and lifted. The wood creaked before giving way. Beneath it lay a metal tin, rusted around the edges, dented slightly, but intact. Ethan lifted it out carefully. Falcon backed up, sitting alert with rigid posture, as though guarding the moment. Ethan opened the tin. Inside was a single object, wrapped in wax paper, a letter. The paper had yellowed, edges curled by age. Ethan unfolded it, revealing handwriting in dark, steady ink. Bold strokes, confident, familiar, as if written by a man who did not hesitate. "If my son finds this cabin, then the truth has reached him at last." Ethan inhaled sharply. His fingers tightened around the fragile page. Strength is not forged in the missions we complete, but in the lives we choose to protect. The world demanded much from me. It will demand even more from you. But if you learn anything from what I left behind, let it be this. A man is not defined by the battles he survives, but by the souls he guards when no one is watching. It was signed, Samuel Cole. Ethan sat back slowly, the weight of the letter settling into him like a revelation decades overdue. He felt the air thicken around him, felt the pulse of something long buried rise to the surface. His grandfather. The man he had never met. The man whose blood ran in his veins. The man whose shadow he had unknowingly followed into the military. Falcon shifted closer, his body pressed gently against Ethan's leg. The dog seemed to sense the shift in Ethan's breathing, the crack forming in the emotional armor he had carried for years. "This place," Ethan whispered, looking around the cabin again. "He built this, or lived here, or hid here." The photographs stared back at him like pieces of a puzzle that had waited 40 years for someone with the right eyes to see them. Falcon let out a low, thoughtful huff, then nudged the letter with his nose. Ethan stroked the dog's head, voice roughening. "You brought me here, didn't you?" Falcon didn't move, but the answer lived in the steady focus of his gaze. Outside, the wind shifted. A curtain of snow slid from the roof, thudding softly to the ground. The forest creaked as if waking from a long sleep. And Ethan Cole, holding the letter of a man whose face he shared, realized this forgotten cabin was not simply a relic. It was an inheritance, a hidden truth, a path waiting for him long before he ever stepped foot on this mountain. And it changed everything. Spring sunlight stretched in soft, golden bands across the Wyoming hills, warming the last patches of lingering snow. The mountains, once white and merciless, now shimmered with early green buds pushing through the thawing earth. For the first time since Ethan Cole had stepped onto this ridge months earlier, the world around him felt alive again, quiet, but not empty, healing as though mirroring the transformation happening inside him. Inside the cabin, Falcon lay comfortably near the open doorway, head resting on his paws, ears twitching as he listened to the shifting wind. His coat, once dulled by exhaustion, now shone with the deep luster of regained strength. Every muscle beneath his black and silver fur was defined, powerful, ready, yet calm. He no longer looked like a creature lost in the storm. He looked like a warrior who had found his post. Ethan stood beside the doorway, one hand resting on the wooden frame. At 34, his broad shoulders and muscular build still carried the traces of years spent in rigorous SEAL conditioning, yet now his posture was different, softer, less defensive. His dark brown hair, cut short in the disciplined military style he couldn't entirely abandon, caught the sunlight. His blue steel eyes, once clouded with memories he avoided, held something new: clarity. A quiet steadiness rooted not in duty, but in purpose. Taking a slow breath, Ethan stepped outside. The air carried the scent of melted snow, wet pine, and new beginnings. Falcon rose instantly and followed, his movements smooth and attentive, not anxious, not restless, just present, fully aligned with the man he had chosen as his bond. The past few weeks had changed everything. After rescuing Lily from the avalanche, Ethan had called the local rescue team, using the emergency radio he rarely touched. The signal was weak, but it reached them. Hours later, as night fell and the mountain calmed, a small rescue crew arrived, among them Lily's mother. Ethan would never forget her face. A woman in her mid-30s, tall and slender, with long chestnut hair plastered to her cheeks by tears and wind. Her skin was pale, nearly translucent from fear, and her green eyes, Lily's eyes, held a storm of terror until she saw her child. She hadn't cared about the ice slicing into her knees as she fell to embrace Lily. She had clutched the girl so tightly Ethan feared she might break her fragile ribs. But Lily only cried softly into her mother's coat, relief pouring from her small body, like warmth returning to frozen limbs. The woman had looked up at Ethan with trembling lips before finally whispering, "Thank you. Thank you for saving my baby." He had only nodded, unable to speak. Something inside him felt unsteady, like emotions he once buried deep had risen too quickly. Falcon had sat beside Lily during the team's medical inspection, pressing his large head into her small hands as if guarding her one last time. The rescue. Workers, seasoned men and women, hardened by countless emergencies, had stared in awe. One muttered, "That dog's a damn hero." Falcon didn't react, but Ethan saw the subtle lift in the dog's posture. A pride earned, not sought. Now, weeks later, the ridge had grown peaceful again. The spring wind was mild, and the sunlight reached places winter had swallowed entirely. Ethan walked past the edge of the porch, Falcon padding beside him like a silent shadow. His eyes drifted toward a stack of lumber neatly piled against the cabin wall, evidence of the recent days spent tearing down old beams, sanding new wood, repairing shattered foundations, and replacing battered windows. The cabin was changing, becoming something else, something new, something right. But the idea hadn't originated with him. It had been Nora Bennett, his elderly neighbor, who first planted the seed. One late afternoon, after Lily had been safely taken home, Nora arrived carrying a tin of warm blueberry muffins. She always baked too much, she claimed, and always just happened to have enough for Ethan. That day, however, her expression held more than simple neighborly warmth. She had stood by the table, hands folded neatly over her wool shawl, her short silver-white hair framed around a face lined with kindness. Her brown eyes, a teacher's eyes, watched Ethan with quiet intention. "Ethan," she said gently, "did your grandfather ever tell you what he dreamed of doing after service?" Ethan had frowned, shaking his head. "I never knew him." Nora nodded slowly. "Samuel Cole was a good man, disciplined, stern at times, but with a heart much softer than he let anyone see." The description struck Ethan harder than expected. "He wanted to build a place for soldiers who returned with invisible wounds," Nora continued, "and for the military dogs who served alongside them. A place to heal, to start over. He believed animals carried pieces of the battles humans couldn't speak of." Ethan felt his chest tighten. A pulse of recognition stirred inside him, like something long dormant finally waking. Nora rested a hand on his arm. Her palm felt small against his wide, battle-hardened frame, but her words carried weight. "Maybe you're meant to finish what he started." For days afterward, her words echoed in Ethan's head. During each sunrise, each moment spent repairing the old cabin, each time Falcon nudged him, as though reading the thoughts he refused to voice. And today, as Ethan surveyed the half-rebuilt structure, he felt certainty settle into his bones. He would finish what Samuel Cole began, not out of obligation, but because he finally understood. He was not meant to disappear into the mountains. He was meant to protect, to guide, to heal, in ways far quieter than war, but far deeper. Falcon nudged him now, bumping gently against his leg. Ethan looked down. "What do you think, boy?" Falcon sat, tail sweeping through the dirt, head tilted with intelligence that seemed almost human. Ethan laughed softly, a rare sound he was still getting used to, hearing from himself. "Yeah," he murmured, "it's time." The next hours were filled with work. Ethan cut boards, hauled beams, hammered nails into the softened earth. Falcon followed him faithfully, occasionally barking at curious squirrels, or standing guard when Ethan used power tools. His presence steadied Ethan's breath, grounded him. Each plank added to the porch felt like rebuilding part of his own fractured foundation. By late afternoon, the sun dipped lower, drowning the ridge in warm, amber light. The wind settled into a soft breeze that carried the faint scent of wild sage. Ethan stepped back to admire the progress. The cabin, once a relic abandoned by time, now stood straighter, stronger, almost proud. "Coalhaven," Ethan whispered. The name drifted into the golden air. Falcon's ears perked at the sound, as if he understood the significance. "A place for new beginnings," Ethan continued. "For people like me. For dogs like you." Falcon trotted forward and pressed his head into Ethan's hand. Ethan rubbed behind his ears, feeling the warmth of the dog's trust. It was a bond forged not by training, but by survival and choice. As daylight softened into dusk, Ethan sat on the steps of the porch. Falcon lay beside him, his head resting on Ethan's boot in silent companionship. The forest glowed with the last remnants of sunlight. The mountains no longer felt like barriers. They felt like guardians of something sacred, something reborn. Ethan looked toward the horizon, voice quiet, sincere. "We made it through the dark," he said, "and maybe, just maybe, this is where we start living again." Falcon lifted his head slightly, eyes reflecting the warm colors of evening. In that moment, man and dog seemed carved from the same light. Two survivors who had finally found meaning, not in war, but in peace. A soft breeze drifted through the trees, carrying the scent of spring and the promise of tomorrow. Ethan placed a hand on Falcon's strong shoulder. "We're home," he whispered. Falcon's tail swept gently across the porch, and as twilight settled over Coalhaven, A new chapter unfolded, not carved by trauma nor forged by battle, but shaped by healing, purpose, and the quiet strength of choosing to begin again. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not roar like thunder, nor split the sky with brilliance. Sometimes they arrive softly, on quiet mornings, in the footsteps of a lost child, or in the steady heartbeat of a loyal dog lying beside a broken man. Ethan learned what so many of us forget in the rush of everyday life. Healing rarely comes all at once. It comes in whispers, in the courage to open one more door, in the strength to care for a life smaller than your pain, in the gentle reminder that purpose often finds us when we no longer search for it. The forest did not save Ethan with grand magic. It saved him with something subtler, a miracle shaped like companionship, hope, and the quiet return of light. And just like Ethan, we each walk through seasons of winter in our own hearts. Yet God, in His quiet wisdom, sends us signs. A kind word from a stranger, a moment that shifts everything, a reminder that we were never meant to walk alone. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need a little light today. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and help us spread stories of faith, courage, and the small miracles that guide us home. May God bless you, protect your loved ones, and fill your days with gentle reminders that His grace is never far from reach. Thank you for watching, and may hope always find its way back to you.